March 2026. The empire fell not by the sword, but by a subpoena. Homeland Security helicopters didn't circle, they hung over his Los Angeles mansion, like vultures. Their rotors sliced the air, an air that once smelled only of success and expensive cologne. Pause. Now it smelled of gasoline in a federal sentence. Armored cars, out of place against the backdrop of palm trees and perfect lawns, smashed through the gates. This was the anatomy of a fall, live. The agents weren't looking for money or drugs, not primarily. They were looking for digital coffins, phones, servers, hard drives, all the memory of a man who built himself on an image. And now that image was being taken apart as evidence. The gleam of his fame was just gilding on the concrete of very dark deeds. And when the first box of evidence was carried out into the sun, it became clear. The audit of his soul had begun. It was only going to get worse from here. The news didn't spread. It detonated. Millions of screens became windows into his personal hell. In the first hours, the world fractured. Some screamed, "Witch hunt." Others, "Long overdue." His name, a synonym for the American dream, became a subject of contention. A mangled fate, played out in real time. The first statement from his lawyers was cold and calculated, a denial packaged in righteous anger. But beneath that noise and deafening silence, not one call of support from former protégés, not one word from the brands he made great. Nothing. His phone, once buzzing with calls from the powerful, now lay mute. Pause. A figure who seemed untouchable suddenly found himself in total isolation. This wasn't just an investigation. This was an excommunication. To comprehend the excommunication, one must first audit the genesis. Before the empire, there was only hunger. A hunger born on the concrete of Harlem and honed in the quiet suburbs of Mount Vernon. This wasn't the aspirational hunger of a dreamer. It was the cold, calculating appetite of a survivor. His biography is not a fairy tale. It is a case study in converting desperation into currency. The early chapters are written in the language of want. He saw the architecture of power early, studying it not as a student, but as a predator. His time at Howard University was a brief reconnaissance mission. The real education happened in the corridors of Uptown Records, an internship that became his hunting ground. He learned the machinery of fame, the levers of influence, the anatomy of a hit. Every handshake was a data point, every conversation an interrogation. The ambition was so raw, it was almost vulgar. A force of nature that could not be contained within someone else's kingdom. The departure from Uptown wasn't a resignation. It was a schism. The birth of Bad Boy Records was not the launch of a label. Pause. It was the founding of a parallel government. The kingdom was built on a sound, a fusion of raw street narrative and decadent, polished beats. The Bad Boy era wasn't just a moment in music. It was a hostile takeover of the culture. The gleam was blinding. Shiny suits that reflected a future no one from the block thought possible. Videos that were less music promotion and more short films about opulent conquest. It was the soundtrack for a generation getting rich, or dying trying. But beneath the gloss, a different economy was at work. The currency was loyalty. The tax was absolute control. This was the meat grinder of fame, operating at maximum capacity. For every chart-topping single, there was a story of suffocating pressure. For every champagne-soaked party, a shadow of paranoia lengthened. The air was thick with the smell of new money and old rivalries. The artists were not just talent, they were assets. Soldiers in a war fought on radio waves and video countdowns. The empire's greatest asset, its crown jewel, was a voice from Brooklyn that weighed as much as the concrete it came from. Pause. The notorious B.I.G. He was the poet laureate of the new regime, and his chronicle would become its most profound and bitter testament. But the death of a king doesn't end an empire. It sanctifies it. For a time, the machine kept running, the suits got shinier, the checks got bigger. The late 90s were a victory lap on a road paved with gold records. Then came the sound of a gunshot in a crowded room. Pause. December 1999. Club New York. A dispute over spilled champagne, a flash of metal, and the entire kingdom was suddenly lit by the cold, strobing blue of police lights. This was the first true audit. Not of finances, but of consequence. The charges were serious. Weapons possession, bribery, a potential prison sentence that would have been the final, fatal edit to the highlight reel. Combs walked. His protege, the rapper Shine, did not. He took the fall, a 10-year sentence that became a footnote in the legend of his boss's invincibility. This was the fateful mistake. Not the shooting itself, but the acquittal. It proved the armor was bulletproof. It taught the dangerous lesson that with enough money and enough power, the rules of mortal men no longer applied. The cracks in the facade were there, but they were filled with gold leaf. And for 2 decades, that was enough. That invincibility became the operating system. The belief that one could not just bend the world to his will, but own the people in it. The lawsuits that trickled out over the years were dismissed as the cost of doing business, the bitter envy of the less successful. But the pattern was there, hiding in plain sight. An inventory of sins filed in court dockets, waiting for a critical mass. The currency was no longer just loyalty, it was flesh. The allegations that would finally detonate the empire spoke not of financial disputes, but of human trafficking. A pipeline of people treated like assets to be leveraged, drugged, and discarded. The anatomy of this particular ruin is found in the testimonies of the accusers. Their ruined fates are the receipts. Then came the ghost from the machine. Pause. A silent video from a hotel hallway, dated 2016. No audio is needed. The cold, clinical violence is a language all its own. It transformed years of rumor into an 8-minute indictment. The woman in the video, Cassandra Ventura, had already filed her report, a detailed account of a decade under suffocating control. But the video was the ledger, the proof of work. It showed the world what the price of admission to the kingdom had always been. The visual proof was a ghost released from the machine. But the true post-mortem audit of the empire would be conducted in silence, on cold government servers. The federal agents who descended on his coastal fortresses were not looking for ghosts. Pause. They were hunting for data. Phones, laptops, hard drives, the digital coffin where a decade of secrets was meticulously stored. The strategy from his camp was predictable. A witch hunt, they called it. A gross overuse of force against a titan. It's a classic defense when the facts smell of concrete and decay. But the prosecution isn't just building a case. They are assembling an inventory of sins, connecting dots across years, states, and victims to draw a picture of a criminal enterprise. While the lawyers trade blows, the empire itself is being liquidated. Howard University, the alma mater that once celebrated him, rescinded his honorary degree. A symbolic exile. The media company he built, Revolt, was sold off. A flagship scuttled by its own captain. Each lost partnership, each rescinded honor, is another nail in the lid. The verdict's being rendered not just in court, but in the marketplace of legacy. Beyond the digital evidence lies a darker, more subterranean mythology. The anatomy of the fall requires a look at the architecture of paranoia. Rumors, persistent as damp rot, speak of tunnels. Pause. Secret passages carved beneath the mansions in Los Angeles and Miami. A shadow infrastructure. The public imagination, fed by whispers from discarded staff and frightened party guests, paints a grim picture. Were they escape routes? Private arteries for moving people and contraband unseen by the sun? It almost doesn't matter if they are real. Their existence in the narrative serves a purpose. They are the physical manifestation of a hidden life, a confirmation of the bunker mentality. These stories transform the mogul from a mere predator into the master of a labyrinth, a monster in a self-built maze. The curse of this legacy is that the facts are now welded to the fictions. The man is inseparable from the myth of his own dark kingdom, and every shadow in his opulent homes now looks like the entrance to a tomb. And from that tomb, the silence is deafening. The architecture of the empire, once thought to be built on concrete and ambition, revealed its true foundation, reputation. And reputation is just vapor. The great unplugging began not with a crash, but with quiet, decisive clicks of a mouse. Contracts terminated, partnerships dissolved. The brand once a glittering constellation was being erased from the digital sky star by star. His assets, billions of them, were no longer a measure of power. They were exhibits in a legal case file frozen in place like Pompeii victims. The money couldn't move. It could only be counted by lawyers. Howard University rescinded his honorary degree, an act of academic exorcism. Revolt, the media company he billed as a voice for the culture, was sold off, the final bitter testament to a king abandoning his own throne room. The loneliness of this new reality is absolute. The crowds are gone, replaced by a legal team whose loyalty is transactional. His last will and testament, once a document of dynastic succession, is now just a footnote in a mountain of discovery motions. The real inheritance he is fighting over is not his fortune. Pause. It is his remaining years of freedom. This is the final moral audit. The closing of the ledger on a man who sold the American dream in a bottle of vodka. His rise was a study in gleam and poverty, the raw hunger of Harlem polished into a global brand. He wasn't just in the music business, he was in the business of mythology, crafting an image of black excellence so bright it blinded everyone, including himself. Now the light is gone. The post-mortem audit reveals the truth. The empire was a kingdom of shadows all along. His lawyers vowed to fight for his name. But that name is no longer an asset. It is a liability, a brand now welded to the grainy horror of a hotel security camera. This is the anatomy of the fall. The crippled destiny of a man who had everything and in the end stands to possess nothing but his own infamy. The ultimate legacy is not the music, the money, or the parties. It is a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and green rooms for decades to come. A story about a king who built a labyrinth to hide his sins, only to find himself trapped inside when the walls came down. The final verdict is not for a court to decide. It is written in the silence of his abandoned mansions. Pause. The bitter inheritance of an empty throne.